We have one of the candidates for Texas Railroad Commissioner joining us today, Bo French. Sir, welcome to Tyler. How you doing?
Michael, thank you for having me. I'm doing great, thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. We'll get to the political topics shortly, but first, I want to hear about you. Who is Bo French?
Yeah, well, I'm a conservative activist. I'm a businessman. I don't really see myself as a politician. I really kind of got involved in politics just because of a growing frustration I've had with a lot of our Republican politicians over the years who I've supported, but then they get into office and they suddenly are not so conservative, or they don't really do what they said they were going to do on the campaign trail. So really, I'm just in this race and involved in this process because I'm concerned about the direction of our country, I'm concerned about the direction of our culture, and I want to fix that.
What's your biggest concern with the country right now?
Well, I think we're losing our culture. I'm 56 years old. Republicans my entire life have told us that we should only focus on fiscal issues and avoid all of the social issues. And the left has just taken ground on every social issue that I can think of. And most people that I talk to around the state are also concerned about that. And so these are things that I have spoken out about a lot. And I think it's why I'm in this position now.
And let's talk about that. Why run for Texas Railroad Commissioner?
Yeah, so I'm a fourth generation oilman. I've been in the oil business in various aspects my entire career since the 90s. My father was in the oil business. Both my grandfathers were in the oil business, and my great grandfather was in the oil business. So it's a business that is important to me personally. But it's important to Texas. It's really our largest and most important industry. You know, we produce almost half the oil and gas in the United States. It's the biggest contributor to our GDP here in Texas, which is the 8th largest economy in the world. And as you can see, oil and gas is really, as I think Donald Trump sees it, is a national security issue. It's why he's been focused on Venezuela, the largest oil reserves in the world, why he's been focused on Iran, the third largest oil reserves in the world, the Panama Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, choke points to the free flow of energy around the world. And I think, like Donald Trump, I see it as something that is critical to really securing our future here in Texas.
And going more off of your work in the energy industry, it's my understanding, if I saw on your website correctly, that you have some security businesses in the Middle East. Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, look, I'm a business guy. I've been involved in a lot of different businesses, not just the oil business. Done private equity and investments in a variety of businesses, and that does include some business in the Middle East. Had security business there, defending against radical jihadists there. I've had guys and guns on ships going around the Horn of Africa, defending against Somali piracy, which is interesting given the Somali piracy we've now found in Minnesota. So just for a lot of these reasons, I have a lot of experience that I think is relevant to this position.
And when we talk about security, are we talking about personal security, cybersecurity in the Middle East? I just want to get a better idea of
I'm talking about knuckle draggers and guns, right? I mean the kind of people that do the work that most people find uncomfortable.
What really got you into that business?
Just a need. I've always been focused on national security issues as part of what I have focused on in my business career, and helping our allies and oil companies and the people who are transacting in what I think is the most critical, the most critical industry in our nation globally.
Let's say you are elected to the Texas Railroad Commission. What would you say are your biggest priorities?
Well, the biggest priority and the thing that really prompted me to run for this position was last year my opponent spearheaded and oversaw the largest increase in environmental regulations, adding an enormous amount of red tape. I compare them to kind of Obama-Biden era EPA type regulations on our industry, really making it harder for small operators and small independents to get into the business and compete with the majors.
And what you mentioned red tape there, what's like the biggest example you see, and how would you work to alleviate it?
Yeah, and they took one page of environmental regulations in the old rules for the Railroad Commission and expanded that to 75 pages of rules. And it's things like implementing New Mexico style pit rules on our operators. Look, and if you're the huge multinational corporations in the oil business, it doesn't really affect you very much. But if you're in East Texas and you're having to abide by those same rules, they really are burdensome. It's delayed. The permitting has already, and these rules just went into place in July. So we really haven't felt the full effect of it yet, but really it's an increased barrier of entry for people wanting to get into the oil business. My father was a wildcatter. The type of drilling he did back in the day would be much harder now, given all these new rules.
And talk to me a bit more about those pit rules in New Mexico, if I heard you correctly. What exactly are those, and how? Talk to me a bit more how they're impacting folks in Texas.
Well, like I said, it has increased the requirement for drillers and operators who are trying to extract, oil and gas from the ground. So the pit rules, for instance, have made it where you have to, they mandate sort of a one-size-fits-all approach to drilling, where they mandate, lining pits with plastic and things like that. In some places that's important, some places it's not important, but the state doesn't seem to care. The Railroad Commission doesn't seem to care. They've forced this onto everybody, and just the delays in permitting to get all of this up and running is really going to cost long-term jobs in Texas, right? When you increase the expense on drilling and on extracting oil, what you've done is you've raised the break-even point for operators to produce that oil. Well, when you raise the break-even point, you have to have a higher oil price. A higher oil price hurts consumers.
We'll talk about the higher oil price in a second, but I do want to ask you, how do you expedite that permitting process?
Well, I would look to roll back some of those regulations that just went into effect last July. So I would work with the other commissioners. Look, I have a good relationship with the other commissioners, Christy Craddock and Wayne Christian. I've known Christy all my life. She and I are the same age. We grew up in Midland together. Wayne I've known for about 15 years. Good guy. And so I feel confident that I'll be a strong voice on that commission to right-size these regulations. Look, the Railroad Commission is actually being sued right now because of these regulations. So it's not like I'm the only one who has this opinion. A lot of people I know in the oil industry are upset about these new rules. And so I would look to work with my industry friends and partners and figure out how we can right-size these in a way so that it's fair for everybody in the oil business.
I do want to ask you, you've called for the deportation of 100 million people. Why do you believe that should be done?
Well, I haven't called for an exact number. I don't really know what the exact number is. You
said that CPAC 100 million people should.
I said there are 100 million people in this country who shouldn't be here. I didn't say that.
So they should be deported.
Well, can I finish my statement, please? Thank you. So what I have said is Gregory Bavino, who is the former head of Border Patrol, has said there are 100 million illegals. I don't know what the real number of illegals are. I know a lot of
the Pew Research Center said in 2023
I don't really
there
care
were
what the
14
Pew
million,
Well, they're
14
wrong.
million
They're wrong.
unauthorized immigrants. So what?
They're a leftist organization. The head of the Border Patrol, I think, has a better picture of what the number is. Okay, so if there are 100 million, if there are 100 million illegals, I think what most people will care about is they want all illegal aliens deported, and I think that's what Republicans want. That's what the country wants, and so if that's the number, then that's the number. It might be less, it might be more. We also have a bunch of H-1B visas here. Most people seem to be against that as well. I am. So there are. I don't know what the real number is, but whatever that number is, I think most people agree, and certainly Republican primary voters agree, that those people should be removed from the country.
What impact do you feel would have on the economy if that many people are removed from the country?
I'm more worried about how it affects Americans and the Americans who are fighting for jobs, trying to get into colleges, trying to get promotions within their jobs, and they've been discriminated against because they're Americans in favor of cheaper labor, and I think that hurts America.
So but just to be clear, you're not exactly sure the number of.
Well, no one's sure of the number.
I mean, the Pew Research Center said 14 million unauthorized.
Well, they've been saying 14 million my whole life. You think that number, when 20 million came across the border in Joe Biden's administration, you think the number's still 14 million? I mean, that's absurd. Nobody believes that.
And we mentioned gas prices. Well, you talk about oil prices earlier. I do want to ask you, affordability, a big topic on voters' minds. What can the Railroad Commission do to bring down gas prices here in Texas?
Well, I think the most important thing is we can lower the operating cost for the people producing oil. And so if you do that, then that creates a lower price. So that is something you can absolutely do.
So how do you go about lowering the operating costs?
Well, I've just said that. We would reduce the red tape. The red tape costs money.
And that's the solution. Remove the red tape, remove the regulation. That'll bring down costs.
Of course it will.
Do you think there needs to be... Is there such a thing as too much regulation in Texas oil?
Of course there is, yeah. You can have too much regulation. Look, I'm a rancher. I'm a landowner. I have a big ranch right in the middle of an oil field in West Texas. So it's not like I'm for no regulation. I'm for responsible regulation. But I'm also for right-sizing those regulations. The requirements in, say, the Delaware Basin in West Texas are very different. Where we get 10 inches of rainfall there. There's very little water. are very different than the requirements in East Texas, where you're getting 80 inches of rainfall a year and there's water everywhere. And so you can't just say that Texas is 1,000 miles across. Having one size fits all regulations just don't make sense.
So would you look for like different regulations for different parts of the state, or not so much?
Yeah, no, I think it's important to right size the regulations for the region that you're in. Look, we have 12 regional offices of the Railroad Commission. They have, over the last decade or two, they've really taken power away from those regional offices and centralized that into bureaucracy in Austin. I think when you are centralizing power and decision making to a centralized bureaucracy in Austin, you're probably not doing what's best for the people in the different parts of Texas with different requirements.
How do you decentralize it then?
Well, I just would reverse, again, I would look to reverse what they've already done. They've taken power away from those offices and centralized it in Austin. I would look to push some of that power and decision making, the permitting, back to those offices.
And let's talk about water, a big topic here across Texas. Is there anything you feel the Railroad Commission should do regarding the resources? Is there anything that can be done?
Yeah, look, I get asked about water probably more than anything. And as an example, I just talked about, Corpus Christi, for instance, is running out of water, and the residents there are facing all kinds of restrictions. There's a big Saudi-owned plastics plant there that's using 25 million gallons of water a day, while the residents are facing restrictions and fines. I think that's fundamentally unfair. I think that if the residents are going to face restrictions, that business should also face restrictions. This is, water is an important resource. We should be protecting our water. I get asked about data centers and the water that they're going to use. And my thought, the Railroad Commission doesn't have anything to do with data centers, but I do have an opinion on how we could fix that problem, and that is require the data centers to use the closed loop cooling system, which only uses a couple hundred gallons of water a year.
Do you think using a closed loop system would alleviate all the concerns regarding data centers across the state, or you think there are other solutions?
Well, not all of the concerns. There are lots of different concerns. There's the concern about pollution. There's the concern about the power. So there are lots of different concerns. None of them really fall under the Railroad Commission.
So water's something you talk about a lot on the campaign trail.
Not a lot. I do get asked about it quite frequently, though, because a lot of people are concerned about water, especially in rural communities where people are concerned about water. The state has a water plan. I've read it. They are now updating that water plan. I think there are we need to get lots of people involved in that process so that all stakeholders are well represented.
Going back a bit to your experience, because it's my understanding you were the Tarrant County GOP chairman for a little bit. If you could tell voters about one decision you have made in your life you feel defines who you are, wherever your career is taking you, what would you tell them?
My professional career or
whatever you feel describes you the most.
Look, I made the decision when I ran for Tarrant County GOP chair that I was just going to be the person in office if I was elected that I've always wanted my elected officials to be. And that's just be unapologetic, outspoken, and defend the principles that matter to my party, the Republican Party. I think many of our politicians don't do that. I've been frustrated with that my whole life. And so I did that as Tarrant County GOP chair. Had a successful tenure there, turning that county around after voting for Joe Biden in 2020 to voting for Donald Trump in 2024. And so I feel that people have responded to the way that I have approached things, and that is just be an unapologetic America First warrior for the values of the Republican Party.
And the reason we're talking right now is because there is a runoff. Neither you nor your opponent, current chairman Jim Wright, garnered 50%, but you were pretty close. You garnered around 32%. What are you doing to appeal to voters who may not have voted for you in March?
Yeah, well, I'm appealing to who I think are the Republican primary voters in this election, and I'm sure my opponent is trying to do the same. But I am reaching out to grassroots organizations all around the state. I've been traveling all around the state. I'm on the road every single day, somewhere talking to somebody. I'm here today in Tyler talking to you. I was in Corsicana yesterday. I'm in Midland tomorrow. So look, it is a statewide campaign, which is very difficult. Texas is a huge state. And this is a down ballot race, and not as many people pay attention to it. It's also a confusing name. It's the Railroad Commission. Most people don't realize that that's the regulating agency over the oil and gas industry. But I have support by the majority of the conservative grassroots organizations in Texas have endorsed my campaign. I'm sort of leveraging them. That's what paid off for me in the primary. Coming from a county like Tarrant County, I didn't have any statewide name ID, but yet almost tied the incumbent. He had the lowest vote total ever as an incumbent on the Railroad Commission. So I think that there is a desire to make a change there, and so I'm working with the conservative organizations in Texas, and feel good about where we are right now.
And on your website, you say you want to end the stranglehold of diversity, equity, and inclusion on the Railroad Commission. Why do you feel this is a problem?
Well, it is a problem because the Railroad Commission, under the leadership of my opponent, has taken the Railroad Commission from 41st in the state to 9th in the state in terms of percentage of their budget spent on DEI. And I think most people find that appalling.
And how so have they done that with their budget? How have they taken it from 41st to 9th?
Because they have increased the percentage of their budget they have spent on DEI.
Do you have the number for how much they've spent?
Well, it's over half the contracts they have awarded. Most of their budget is through. They award contracts to plug wells, abandoned wells in Texas, and it's about 90% of their budget actually. And over half of that has gone through what's called the HUB program, historically underutilized businesses, which has some good aspects of it, right? Helping veteran-owned businesses, for instance. But that's not the way the Railroad Commission is used. At less than 1% of those contracts have gone to veteran-owned businesses. It's gone to award contracts based on skin color or based on gender, as opposed to awarding contracts based on merit. And I think most people, especially Republican primary voters, are incensed by that and want all of our state contracts, based on, funded by taxpayer money, awarded on merit.
But do you have a number for how much those contracts have been over the last few months?
An exact dollar figure? I don't have that dollar figure.
And are there like names associated with those contracts, or it's just something they give out?
I put all this together 6 months ago. I don't recall the names off the top of my head. No.
What would you say to folks who say that America has prospered because of diversity in this country?
I don't think diversity is our strength at all. I think diversity has actually hurt our culture.
Why?
Well, because we have a culture that is being changed from our culture into something else. People have come here and not assimilated. People have come here, they're not embracing, our values, just our cultural norms. We at one time were a very high trust society. I remember as a kid, getting out of the car, going into the store, just leaving the car unlocked, never thought about anybody breaking in. You can't go anywhere now without worrying about crime.
And why do you think that is?
Because I think people have come here who don't appreciate what being in a high trust society is like. They bring their third world views here, and where crime is normal, they don't view crime the same way we do, and I think it's endangered our culture.
Can you name an example of someone you feel has come here that has endangered the culture?
Ilhan Omar. She's come here from Somalia. She was granted asylum in this country, and she has used her platform in Congress to enrich herself via fraud, and preaches from her position about how she wants to support Somalia instead of America. When you come to America, you're supposed to assimilate. Every other country demands this, by the way. America seems to be the only country that doesn't.
It's my understanding one of your first legislative priority will be placing Muslim-majority countries on the list of countries that cannot buy Texas land. And going off of what you just said about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, what would you say to folks who are coming, from that region of the world or any other part of the world who may be concerned about the rhetoric you're using, feel it will demonize them if you're elected?
I really don't care what foreigners think of America. I care what Americans think about America. And most Americans that I talk to also feel the same way.
You don't care at all what foreigners think about America, even if they visit here?
I'm an American. I care about what Americans think. Look, I think it's the job of the elected official to protect America. That's what America First means. It's what the majority of Americans voted for in the 2024 election, an America First agenda. And so, yeah, I care about Americans first.
Do you feel as though people who have come from another country have benefited America in any way?
Look, I reject the premise of the question. I think focusing on America First means let's empower Americans. Let's not discriminate against Americans. We have discriminated horribly against Americans. You talk to most young men, women between the age of 20 and 35, and they'll tell you their entire lives they were discriminated against in school, discriminated against trying to get into colleges, discriminated against getting their first job, discriminated against trying to get promotions in those jobs. Their entire lives they've been told they should feel guilty about being Americans and that we have to just give up their position of being an American and their birthright here in America to some foreigner who comes in, will take that job for less money, will take that promotion for less money. And so for those reasons, look, Republican primary voters in Texas reject that notion overwhelmingly. And so I, like a lot of my fellow Republicans, also reject that notion. And so I'm going to be an outspoken defender of those values when I get in office.
But you don't feel as though people coming from another country have benefited America at all?
I've never said that. What I've said is we've gone too far. That's the problem. We've gone too far in prioritizing foreigners over Americans, and most Americans reject that.
Is there anything you do on the Railroad Commission about that to solve it in your view?
Well, I think reducing or getting rid of altogether the DEI spending that's gone on there, I think has been a problem. And I think just being an elected official in Texas in a statewide position, working with the legislature, I don't recall a railroad commissioner ever offering up legislative priorities. I announced, as you mentioned a minute ago, the first legislative priority I would have. I think that's something that I can do from that position.
If you could stop folks from immigrating to America, would you?
I think we do need to have an immigration moratorium to figure out what is the right number of immigrants for our country. We're spending trillions of dollars. We're almost 40 trillion in debt. We're discovering many of these immigrant communities have engaged in massive amounts of fraud. I think we need to investigate all that and pause all that. And look, again, this is not my opinion. This is the opinion of the vast majority of primary voters in Texas.
Well, okay, let me ask you this. If you do not end up winning in this runoff, do you plan on endorsing in this race?
Of course. Look, I'm a big believer in a vigorous primary process, but I'm also a big believer that once the primary is over, you help. As a Republican, I will help every Republican on the ballot.
Will you endorse Chairman Jim Wright?
Of course.
We've talked a lot over the course of this conversation, and the runoff is in less than 2 weeks from now. I believe it's on the 26th. It's coming up very shortly. Is there anything I did not ask you would like to tell our audience?
Listen, I think that what primary voters around the state have told me is they want someone who is kind of like Donald Trump in office, and that is an unapologetic warrior for the America First agenda. That's what I am. I have a demonstrated track record of that, and I think that's what most primary voters are responding to.
All right. And actually, I remembered the question. That moratorium on immigrants, would you happen to have a number in mind as we're talking that you'd like to see?
Well, a moratorium means zero. So 0 new immigrants until we deport all of the illegal aliens in America. I think most people find that to be a reasonable solution.
Okay. Republican candidate for Texas Railroad Commissioner Beau French, sir, we appreciate you coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.